Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Settle in wherever you are. You don't have to do anything now. You don't have to follow along, or understand, or remember. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been holding all day. Let the pillow take the whole weight of your head. There is nothing to figure out here, and nowhere else to be. Just a voice in the dark, and some very old stories, told slowly, one at a time, with space to breathe between them. Tonight we are going to spend some time with the Zen tradition, the little teaching stories that were passed for centuries from master to student in the quiet air of monasteries and roadside temples. 49 of them will unfold together. You do not need to know anything about Zen to listen. You don't need to believe anything or take anything on. These are just stories and the strange, gentle way they have of landing sideways when you least expect it, not by argument, not by explanation, but by a small, quiet turn that you feel more than you understand. Feel free to share, if you'd like, what time it is and where in the world you're listening from. And then let that go too. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it out even slower. Thank you for joining us here. Let us begin. Picture a cup, an ordinary cup, on a low table in a quiet room, and somebody pouring tea into it in a thin, steady stream. The cup fills. You can see the level rising, pale green against the inside of the cup, climbing toward the rim. And then it reaches the rim. And then, and here is the strange part, the pouring doesn't stop. The tea rises to the very lip of the cup and trembles there for a moment, and then it spills over the rim, down the outside of the cup, across the table. And still the pouring goes on, patient, unhurried, tea running everywhere, and the one holding the pot simply keeps pouring, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. This is where we begin. With a cup that is already full and the tea still coming. There was a Zen master named Nan-in who lived in Japan during the Meiji era, a time not so very long ago, when the old world and the new world were brushing up against each other, and many people were suddenly curious about the ancient teachings again. And one day a professor came to see him, a university professor, a learned man, a man who had read a great deal and thought a great deal, and who came to inquire about Zen, to add it, perhaps, to everything else he already knew. Nan-in received him kindly, as you would receive any guest. He invited him to sit, and he prepared to serve tea, the way a host does, the way people have done for one another for as long as there have been guests and there has been tea. He took up the pot. He began to pour into the professor's cup, and the professor, being a professor, began to talk about what he understood of Zen, about his opinions, his theories, the things he had read, the conclusions he had already reached. He talked, and Nan-in poured, and the cup filled, and still the professor talked, and still Nan-in poured. The tea reached the brim of the cup, and Nan-in kept pouring. It ran over the top, it spread across the table, and Nan-in kept pouring, calmly, steadily, watching it overflow. Until the professor could no longer restrain himself. He watched the tea running everywhere, and he cried out, "It's overfull. No more will go in." And Nan-in set down the pot and looked at him and said, gently, like this cup, "You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" And that's all. That's the whole story. The master doesn't explain any further. He doesn't lecture the professor on how to empty himself, or hand him a method, or a practice, or a list of things to do. He simply lets the image sit there, the overflowing cup, the tea on the table, the full mind that has no room left in it for anything new. So let it sit with you too for a moment. You don't have to do anything with it. Just notice, maybe, how full your own cup has become by the end of a day. All the things you carried in it, all the opinions, the plans, the worries, the half-finished conversations, the things you meant to say, and the things you wish you hadn't. A whole day poured into one small cup, until it's brimming, until it's spilling over the sides. And here, in the dark, you don't have to add anything more. You can just stop pouring. You can let the cup be as full as it is, and set the pot down, and rest. We have 49 of these to move through tonight, and I want to tell you something about that number before we go on, because it isn't an accident. In the old teachings, in the Tibetan tradition, in what is sometimes called the bardo, there is the idea of an in-between, a passage. They speak of 49 days, a stretch of time between one state and the next, a slow crossing from what was into what comes after. Not a thing to be afraid of. More like a long, quiet corridor. A river you're being carried across, a little at a time, until you're set down gently on the far side. So think of these 49 stories that way, if you like. 49 small crossings. 49 little settlings, one after another, each one carrying you a bit further from the noise of the day and a bit closer to sleep. You don't have to reach the end. That's the important part. Most people won't, and that's exactly as it should be. Whenever the river sets you down, whenever your mind grows heavy and quiet and you begin to drift, that is the right place to stop. You lose nothing by not finishing. There's no last page you need to turn. Each story is complete in itself, a small world that opens and closes, and you can step off at any one of them, into sleep, and let the rest go on flowing without you. So, let's cross to the next one. Two monks were travelling together along a road. Their names were Tanzan and Ekido, and they had taken the vows that monks of their kind took. Among them, the vow not to touch a woman, not to come near, to keep a certain careful distance as part of their discipline. It had been raining, the kind of long, soaking rain that turns a dirt road to mud and makes every low place a puddle and every crossing a small ordeal. And as the two monks came around a bend, they found a young woman standing at a muddy crossing in a fine silk kimono, unable to get across. The mud was too deep, the water too wide, and she stood there at the edge of it, stuck, unwilling to ruin her clothes, unable to go forward. Tanzan did not hesitate. He simply said, "Come on, girl," and he lifted her up in his arms and carried her across the mud and set her down on the dry ground on the other side. And then he walked on, and Ekido walked beside him, and neither of them spoke. They walked for hours, mile after mile of wet road, the temple still far ahead, the light going long and golden and then grey. And the whole time, Ekido said nothing, but something was building in him, something was turning over and over in his mind, until at last he could not hold it in any longer, and it came out of him, all at once. "We monks don't go near women," he said, "especially not young and lovely ones. It's dangerous. Why did you do that?" And Tanzan looked at him, a little surprised, and said, "I left the girl there, at the crossing." "Are you still carrying her? Feel that one for a moment. Feel the shape of it." Tanzan carried her across the mud, a small kindness, done and finished, set down on the far bank and left behind. But Ekido carried her for hours, in his mind, in his silence. In that turning over that wouldn't stop, he was still carrying her long after the actual weight was gone. And isn't that so much of what keeps us awake? Not the thing itself, but the carrying of it. The conversation that ended this afternoon, that you've replayed 40 times since. the look someone gave you, the thing you should have said. You set the actual moment down hours ago. It's over. It's behind you on the road. And yet here it is, still in your arms, still being carried into the night. So maybe, tonight, you can be Tanzan. You can set it down at the crossing where it happened, and walk on, and leave it there in the mud where it belongs. You don't have to keep carrying it all the way home. Let's let that settle. And let's cross to the next. There was a nun named Chiono. She had studied for years, long years, patient years, and still awakening had not come to her. She practiced, and she sat, and she gave herself to it completely, and still the thing she was reaching for stayed just out of reach, the way the moon on the water stays out of reach, no matter how you cup your hands around it. And one night she was carrying water. Just that. An ordinary chore, a thing done 1,000 times without thinking, walking with an old wooden pail full of water. In the dark, with the moon reflected on the surface of the water in the pail, that trembling silver disk riding along on top as she walked. The pail was an old one. It was held together, the way those old pails were, by a band of bamboo wrapped around the wooden staves, binding them tight. And that night as she walked, the bamboo band broke. It simply gave way. And when it gave way, the staves fell loose, and the bottom of the pail dropped straight out, and all at once the water was gone, poured out onto the ground in an instant, and with the water. The moon was gone too. No more water in the pail. No more moon in the water, just an empty broken pail in her hands, and the real moon up above, and the sudden shocking absence of the thing that had been there a heartbeat before. And in that instant, Chiono was free. That's all it took. Not years of effort, or rather all those years, and then this. The bottom falling out of an old bucket in the dark. The water gone, the reflected moon gone, and something in her breaking open at the same moment the pail broke open. No more water in the pail. No more moon in the water. I don't need to explain that one to you. I couldn't. Really, it's not the kind of thing that explains. It's the kind of thing you just let fall through you, the way the water fell through the bottom of the pail, here, and then gone, and something lighter left behind. When the bottom falls out of the bucket, where does the moon go? You don't have to answer. Let the question drift down through you and settle the way the water settled into the ground. And rest. The next story is one of the most beloved in all of Zen, and it's about a man who met the worst thing that could happen to him, and then the best thing, with exactly the same 3 words. His name was Hakuin. Hakuin Ekaku, who lived from 1686 to 1769, a real master, one of the great figures of the tradition, the very one who later gave the world the famous riddle about the sound of one hand, which will come to another night, further down the river. But this story is not about his teaching, it's about his life, and how he lived it. Hakuin was praised by the people who lived near him. They spoke of him as one who lived a pure life, a good life, a life of quiet integrity. He was to his neighbours a man beyond reproach. And then a girl in the village became pregnant, and her parents, furious, demanded to know who the father was. And the girl, frightened, cornered, for reasons of her own, named Hakuin. She said it was the master, Hakuin, the pure one, the good one. Her parents came to him in a rage. They accused him. They said terrible things, and Hakuin said only, "Is that so?" That was all. Just those 3 words. Is that so? The child was born, and it was brought to him because he had been named as the father, and now he was expected to raise it. And by this time, his reputation was in ruins. The neighbours who had praised him now whispered about him, or worse. Everything he had was gone, his good name, the respect of the village, all of it. But he took the child in. He cared for it as best he could. He begged milk from the neighbours, and everything else the baby needed, enduring their scorn as he did it, carrying the child from door to door through the very village that now despised him. A year passed. And then the girl could bear it no longer, and she told her parents the truth. The real father was a young man in the village, not Hakuin at all. She had lied all that time ago to protect someone else. Her parents were horrified at what they had done. They went to Hakuin, and they bowed low, and they begged his forgiveness and asked to take the child back. And Hakuin, handing the child over, said only, "Is that so?" That's where it ends. Not with anger at being wronged. Not with relief at being cleared. Not with any speech about patience or forgiveness or the injustice of it all. Just those same 3 words, offered to disgrace and to vindication alike, as if they were the same weather passing over the same still mountain. Is that so? There's an enormous ease in that if you let yourself feel it. A whole year of undeserved shame, and it moves through him like wind through an open window, nothing to grip, nothing to catch on. And then the good news comes, the exoneration. And that moves through just as freely. He isn't made smaller by the bad or larger by the good. He just meets each one as it comes and lets it pass and stays exactly himself. You've been carrying today's verdicts about yourself, maybe, the things that went well, the things that went badly, the little tally your mind keeps. Tonight you can set that tally down too. Whatever the day decided about you, is that so? Let it be as light as that. Let it pass over you like weather. And rest underneath it, unmoved. Take a slow, deep breath now. In through the nose, slowly, and out, even slower than you drew it in. Feel wherever your body is touching the bed, the couch, the chair, those points of contact, holding you up so completely that you don't have to hold yourself up at all. There's nothing to keep track of. The stories will keep coming. You can let your grip loosen a little more with each one. Our next crossing takes us far back in time, and to China, to one of the very oldest and most famous exchanges in all of Zen, so old and so treasured that it was written down in one of the great classic collections. There was a master named Joshu in Chinese, Zhaozhou, who lived a very long time ago, from the year 778 to the year 897. A very long life, more than 100 years by the traditional count. And his sayings were so prized that centuries later, in the year 1228, a teacher named Wumen Huikai gathered many of the greatest koans into a collection called the Gateless Gate, and Joshu's words are all through it. This little exchange is the 7th case in that book. A monk came to Joshu, a new monk, freshly arrived at the monastery, eager, hungry for the teaching. He came to the old master, and he asked to be taught. "I have just entered the monastery," he said. "Please teach me." And Joshu said, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk said, "Yes, I have eaten." And Joshu said, "Then wash your bowl." And at those words the monk was enlightened. That's it. That's the whole thing. Have you eaten? Yes, then wash your bowl. The monk came looking for something vast, some secret, some lofty teaching that would lift him up out of his ordinary life into something higher and shining. And the old master pointed him, instead, straight back down into the most ordinary moment there is. You've eaten. Now wash the bowl you ate from. There's nothing else. There's no higher thing hovering above the washing of the bowl. The washing of the bowl done completely, with your whole attention, is itself the thing you were looking for. It was never anywhere else. There's a great kindness in that, when you really let it land. It means you don't have to go anywhere to find peace. You don't have to become someone else, or achieve some special state, or climb some mountain. It's right here, in the simplest possible thing. In the warm water and the empty bowl. In lying down at the end of the day and letting yourself lie down completely. You've eaten your day. Now you can wash your bowl and rest. That's the whole of it. Nothing is being kept from you. There's no further thing you need to reach for tonight. Let that be enough. Let the simplicity of it be a kind of relief. Now, before we go on to the next stories, let's pause here for a moment together. We've made 5 crossings already. The overflowing cup, the monks at the muddy road, the nun and the broken pail, Hakuin and his 3 quiet words, and old Joshu sending the monk to wash his bowl. 5 small settlings. You don't need to hold on to any of them. They've done their work simply by passing through you. Take another slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet in the room. Notice how the sounds of the day have thinned out into this stillness, this dark, this voice, and your own slow breathing underneath it all. Quick reminder, before we drift on. After years of lying awake with a racing mind, deep sleep finally became possible for me. Now learning comes easier, energy is real, and the mind stays sharp. Sleeping like a baby changed everything. If you'd ever want the exact system that made that possible, it's in the link in the pinned comments. That's all. Nothing to do about it now. When you're ready, we'll continue together. There's no hurry. The river's in no hurry either. Let's cross gently to the next one. And this one is famous, perhaps the single most famous story in all of Zen, and one of the shortest. It comes from that same collection, the Gateless Gate, gathered by Wumen Huikai. In fact, it's the very first case in the book. And it turns again on our old friend Joshu of Zhaozhou, the master who lived more than 100 years. A monk, earnest and troubled, came to Joshu with a real question, one of the deep ones. He asked, does a dog have Buddha nature? Now you don't need the whole background of that to feel it. Buddha nature, the idea that everything, everyone, carries within it something already awake, already whole, the seed of enlightenment. The teaching said that all beings have it, so the monk's question was almost a test of the teaching itself. Surely a dog, too. Surely even a dog has this awakened nature within it. And a yes would have been easy. A yes would have confirmed everything, tied it up neatly, sent the monk away satisfied and unchanged. Joshu did not say yes. He said mu. Mu, a single syllable. It means roughly no, or not, or nothing, or no thing. But it isn't really an answer at all. It's more like a door quietly closing on the whole way the monk was thinking. The monk wanted a yes or a no to file away, and Joshu handed him a word that refuses to be filed away. Mu, not yes, not no. Something that stops the questioning mind in its tracks. That gives it nothing to grab onto, so that for one moment the endless machinery of asking and answering simply stops. Generations of Zen students have spent years with that one syllable, just sitting with it. Mu, not trying to solve it because it can't be solved, letting it dissolve the part of the mind that always wants to solve. And isn't that, in a way, exactly what you're doing now? Lying here, letting the questions go unanswered. All the little yes or no's your mind wants to settle before it will let you sleep. Did I? Should I? Will it? What if? You don't have to answer any of them tonight. You can meet every one of them with a soft, spacious mu. Not yes, not no. Just let it dissolve. Let the machinery wind down. There's nothing here that needs solving before you can rest. Mu, feel how much lighter it is than an answer. Let's stay a while longer with Hakuin, the master of Is That So, because it was he who gave the world another of these mind-stopping riddles, one you've almost certainly heard, even if you never knew where it came from. There was a temple where a master named Mokurai taught, and in that temple lived a boy, just 12 years old, named Toyo. Toyo saw the older students going to the master's room morning and evening to receive their koan, their private riddle to work on, their strange question to sit with, and little Toyo wanted one too. He was only a child, but his heart was set on it. Mokurai at first told him to wait. He was too young. But Toyo was so persistent that at last the master relented and gave him the riddle. He said, "You can hear the sound of two hands when they clap together. Now show me the sound of one hand." The sound of one hand. Not two hands clapping, the sound of one hand alone. Toyo bowed and went off to his room to think about it, and through his window he could hear music drifting up from the geisha house nearby. "Ah," he thought, "that must be it," and he went to the master and played the music. "No," said Mokurai, "that won't do at all. That's not the sound of one hand." So Toyo went away and found a quieter place and listened, and he heard water dripping. That must be it, he thought. The sound of one hand is the sound of dripping water, and he came back and made the sound of dripping water. "No," said Mokurai again. "That is the sound of dripping water, not the sound of one hand. Try again." And so it went. Toyo listened for the sound of one hand in everything. He heard the sighing of the wind, and he brought that. No. He heard the cry of an owl in the night, and he brought that. No. He heard the shrill of the locusts, and he brought that. No. And no. And no. More than 10 times the little boy came, with more than 10 different sounds, and each time the master turned him away. For nearly a year Toyo pondered what the sound of one hand could be. And at last, one day, he stopped searching outward. He went so deep and so still that he passed beyond all sounds altogether. Beyond the music, beyond the water, beyond the wind and the owl and the locust. He came, at last, to a soundless sound. And when he brought that, when he brought the silence underneath all the sounds, the master knew he had reached it. Isn't it lovely that a child got there? Not by cleverness, not by finding the right answer, because there wasn't one to find, but by exhausting every answer, one after another, until there were no more answers left, and only the deep, still silence underneath remained. You're near that silence right now, underneath the last sounds of the day, underneath even this voice. There's a soundless sound down there, the quiet that's always been there, that was there before all the noise, and will be there after. You don't have to reach it. You're already sinking toward it, the way Toyo sank past all his answers into the still place beneath them. Let yourself keep sinking. There's no wrong sound down there. There's no answer you have to get right. Just the quiet holding you. Let's take one more this part, and it's a small one and a strange one, and it will land, as these do, sideways. There was a young man named Yamaoka Teshu, and he was a real person who lived from 1836 to 1888, but when this story happened he was still young and clever and very pleased with how much he understood. He was going from master to master, learning, absorbing, and he had arrived at a certain understanding of emptiness, of the teaching that all things are, in their deepest nature, empty, no fixed self, no solid thing, nothing to grasp, and he came, full of this, to a master named Dokuon. And he announced his understanding. The mind, the Buddha, all sentient beings, he said, none of them really exist. The true nature of all things is emptiness. There is no realization, no delusion, no sage, no ordinary person. There is no giving and nothing to be received. Dokwan said nothing. He was sitting there quietly, smoking his pipe. He let the young man finish his grand speech about how nothing existed, and then, without a word, Dokyon suddenly picked up his pipe and gave the young man a good hard whack with it. Teshu leapt up, furious. His face went red with anger. How dare he? Here he was, explaining the profound truth of emptiness, and the old man just hits him with a pipe. And Dokyon looked at him calmly and said, "If nothing exists, where did that anger come from?" And that was the whole teaching. Right there. All the young man's fine words about how nothing existed, and one tap of a pipe brought the anger roaring up out of nowhere, real as fire, real as the sting on his arm. Where did that come from if nothing exists? The idea of emptiness was in his head. But the anger was alive, and immediate, and completely his. There's something so human and so gentle underneath the humour of it. The master isn't cruel, he's just showing the young man, in the quickest possible way, the gap between what we say we understand and what we actually live. It's easy to have grand ideas about how things are. It's another thing entirely when the pipe taps your arm. And there's no scolding at the end. No long correction. Just that one question, left hanging in the air, for the young man to sit with, and for us to sit with too. Where did that come from? All the peace we talk ourselves into during the day, and then some small thing taps us, and up it all comes. That's not a failure. It's just how alive we are, how real we are under all our ideas. You don't have to sort any of that out tonight. You can let the young man be angry, and let the old master smoke his pipe, and let the question hang there in the dark, unanswered, the way the best of these are always left unanswered. Because that's the secret of these stories, and I'll say it just once, so that it can quietly shape all the ones still to come. They aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be set down in the dark air between two people, a master and a student, once, long ago, and now just this voice and you. Set down. And left. Not solved, not summed up. Carried off into sleep, where they finish themselves, in their own way, without any help from your thinking mind. So let them. Let the cup overflow and the tea run across the table. Let Tanzan set the girl down at the crossing and walk on. Let the bottom fall out of Chiono's pail and the moon spill into the grass. Let Hakuin say, "Is that so?" to everything the world hands him. Let Joshu send you off to wash your bowl. Let his single syllable mu dissolve every question you're still holding. Let little Toyo find the soundless sound. Let the pipe tap the young man's arm and the anger flare and fade. You've crossed a good stretch of the river already. There's so much more ahead, and none of it asks anything of you. You can drift off right here if the current is carrying you down. Or you can stay a while longer and let the next stories arrive, one by one, out of the dark. Take a slow breath, let it out slower still. There is nothing to figure out, and nowhere else to be. Just the next story coming softly, whenever you're ready for it. Joshu was his name in the Japanese tradition. In Chinese he is called Zhaozhou, and he lived from the year 778 to 897, 120 years, most of them spent in a small monastery in the north of China. Teaching in the way he always taught, with a word or a gesture or a cup of tea or nothing at all. One afternoon a monk came to him with a question. This was not unusual. Monks were always coming to Joshu with questions. He was known for his answers, or rather for the strange quality of them, the way they didn't exactly answer anything, but left you standing in a different place than where you'd been standing before. The monk's question was this: has a dog Buddha nature? Now, you need to know what was at stake in this question, or at least what the monk thought was at stake. Buddhist teaching holds that all sentient beings possess Buddha nature, the seed of awakening, the capacity to know the clear, open quality of mind that all the teaching is pointing toward. The sutras say this, the teachers say this, and so the monk, being a careful thinker, wanted to check. All beings, really? Even a dog? It was, in its way, a serious philosophical question. Joshu looked at the monk, and then he said, "Mu." That's all. One syllable. Mu. In Chinese, it is written as a character, meaning no or not or nothing of the kind. But the masters are quick to tell you that Joshu did not mean simply no, a dog has no Buddha nature. That would be a theological answer to a theological question, and Joshu was not in the business of theology, he was in the business of cutting through. Mu, not no, not yes, not a refusal and not an agreement. A word that dissolves the question rather than answering it, the way a lit match dissolves in its own burning. The monk stood there. The question had become something else. It was no longer a question about dogs or Buddha nature. It had become a single syllable hanging in the air, and the monk was inside it, and there was nothing to do with it but sit down and carry it. This is the first koan in the Mumonkan, the Gateless Gate, compiled by the master Wumen Huikai in the year 1228. Monks have carried this syllable for 800 years. They have sat with it in cold halls at 4 in the morning. They have walked with it in the garden. They have brought it to their teachers again and again, tried to answer it 100 different ways, with arguments, with tears, with silence, with shouts, and been sent away each time. Not because the answer was wrong, but because answering is not the point. The point is the carrying. The point is what happens to the mind that holds one question long enough, without demanding a resolution, without reaching for comfort, until the question and the mind that holds it become the same thing, and something very quiet opens up in the middle. You can carry Mu tonight if you like, not as a practice, not as an assignment, just as a sound, just as the shape of what we don't know, held gently in the breath. Mu, not no, not yes, just the open space where a question used to be. Let's pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice what has gone still, and when you're ready, we'll continue together. There was a boy named Toyo. He was 12 years old, and he lived in the temple of Kenninji, and he very much wanted a koan. He had watched the older monks receive their koans from the master Mokurai and go away to work on them for months and come back changed, and he thought that he too was ready for this kind of serious study. He went to Mokurai and asked. Mokurai considered him, a 12-year-old boy, earnest, impatient, the way all boys are impatient, in ways they don't yet recognize as impatience. And then Mokurai gave him the koan. You can hear the sound of 2 hands clapping, the master said. Now show me the sound of 1 hand. Toyo bowed and went away to think about this. He was back 3 days later with an answer. The music of the geisha, he said. He had heard music drifting from the entertainment district nearby and had thought, a single hand, making sound, this must be it. Mokurai shook his head. Toyo went away again. He came back with the sound of dripping water, then the sound of wind in pine trees, then the call of an owl at night, then the chirping of insects. Each time, the master looked at him calmly and sent him away. This went on for a year. Toyo was frustrated in the way that only children, and in truth all of us, are frustrated when we try very hard at something and keep failing. He felt the task was unfair. How can you hear what cannot be heard? He had listened to everything. He had been patient, or at least he had tried. And then one evening, something shifted. It was not dramatic. He was sitting quietly, and something that had been reaching, some forward-leaning, grasping quality of attention, simply stopped. Not because he decided to stop it, just because it exhausted itself and fell still. And in that stillness there was something. Not a sound exactly, something more like the condition in which sound arises, the space before the clap, the breath before the word. He didn't have a name for it. He went to Mokurai and said nothing. Or said everything. The accounts disagree because the answer was not in words. But the master looked at him differently this time. The koan of one hand is Hakuin Ekaku's, from the 18th century, Hakuin, who lived from 1686 to 1769, who is considered the reviver of Rinzai Zen in Japan, who is the same master from the story we told earlier tonight, the one who accepted disgrace with only, "Is that so?" He gave this koan to students not because he thought they would solve it, but because he knew what serious, sustained wondering does to a mind that holds it long enough. It thins the walls, it loosens the habit of grasping. It teaches the reaching mind to rest. You can let Toyo's year of listening settle somewhere in you tonight. The geisha music, the dripping water, the wind, the owl, the insects, all the sounds that weren't it. And then the quiet that was. There is no test, there is no right answer, there is only the open hand and the open ear, and however much of the night remains. Master Gute had a simple way of teaching. Whenever a student came to him with a question about Zen, however small the question, however large, however philosophical or practical or confused, Gute would raise one finger. Just one. Slowly, deliberately, and then he would lower it. And say nothing more. This was his teaching. The whole of it. Now, Gute's young attendant, a boy who served in the temple, who watched the master day after day raise that finger to every question anyone asked, eventually began to imitate him. Visitors would arrive and ask the boy something, and the boy would raise his own small finger very solemnly, the way he had seen the master do it. The visitors sometimes laughed, sometimes they bowed. Either way, the boy felt that he was doing Zen. One day Gute saw this. He called the boy to him, gently, without anger. The boy came. And then the master did something that stops us, that we have to breathe around, even telling it. He reached out and caught the boy's finger and cut off the tip of it. The boy cried out and ran. Gute called after him. The boy stopped, and Gute raised his own finger, slowly, as he always had. One finger. The boy looked at the master's raised finger. He looked at his own hand, where his finger was. And in the shock of it, in the raw, searing present tense of that moment, something broke open. He understood. This story needs to be handled gently, and I'll say plainly, the point is not the pain, and the master's action has troubled many people, as it should. But what the story is really showing us is the difference between imitation and understanding. The boy had learned the shape of the gesture. He had not learned what it was pointing at. He was copying the finger without seeing the moon. And the moment his copy was gone, the real thing was there, right in front of him, in Gute's hand, just as it had always been. We do this, all of us. We learn the right words for things. We perform the understanding. We say what we've heard wise people say. And it works for a while, until the moment something reaches in and takes away the borrowed version, and we have to find the real one. The story is from the Gateless Gate, Case 3. It comes to us across 900 years of teaching. What we carry from it tonight is not the shock, but the gentler question underneath it. What, in your own practice of understanding, is the borrowed finger? What are you raising that is not quite yours yet? Let that question be quiet. Don't answer it. Just let it sit in the dark. Young Yamaoka Tesshu was 21 years old and already convinced. He had studied, he had practiced, he had sat in meditation until his legs went numb, and he had arrived at what seemed to him a clear and reasonable conclusion. Nothing exists. All is emptiness. The self is a fiction. There is no deluded mind, there is no awakening to seek, because there is no one to be deluded and no one to awaken. This is not an unusual conclusion for a young man to reach. The ideas are real. Sunyata, emptiness, is one of the central teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, and it is genuinely, carefully true. But there is a difference between knowing a teaching and inhabiting it, and young Tesshu had done the first and was mistaking it for the second. He went to call on the master Dokuon. The master was in his room, smoking his pipe in silence. Tesshu sat down and explained his understanding. He laid it out clearly, calmly. All is emptiness. No such thing as Buddha, no such thing as teachings, no Dharma, no such thing as deluded mind, no such thing as realization or the possibility of realization. Nothing exists. Dokyon listened quietly. He smoked his pipe, and then, without a word, he picked up his tobacco pipe and whacked the young man on the head. Tesshu jumped up, furious, really furious. The hot, instant, fully formed anger of a young man who has been struck. Dokyon looked at him with calm, mild eyes. If nothing exists, he said, where did that anger come from? Tesshu stood there, the anger in his chest. The answer he had been so certain of a moment ago, already a little less certain. He bowed. He left. He studied for many more years. There is such kindness in this story, underneath the roughness of it. Dokuon was not being cruel, he was being precise. Tesshu had a beautiful, well-constructed understanding of emptiness, assembled from everything he had read and thought and reasoned. And the old master, without a single argument, without disagreeing with a single word, simply moved from the idea to the experience, a tap on the head, a flare of real anger, and showed Tesshu that the map and the territory are not the same thing. We've all built these careful architectures of understanding. We know what forgiveness is. We know that judgment is something to release. We know that things change and that clinging causes pain. We know all of this. And then someone says something, or something hurts, and the knowing is over there on the shelf, and the feeling is right here in the body. Very real, very hot, very much existing. That's not failure. That's just the next place to look. Yamaoka Tesshu, 1836 to 1888, went on to become one of the most revered swordsmanship masters in Japanese history, as well as a serious Zen practitioner. But tonight, he is just a 21-year-old boy sitting in a master's room, very sure of things, and then not quite so sure. Rest there a moment. Let the anger exist. Let the emptiness exist. Let both be true, if they're both true. There was a man named Daiju who travelled a long way to visit the master Basso. He bowed. He explained why he had come. I am seeking enlightenment, he said, which is perhaps the most honest thing a person can say, and also the masters would tell you, very close to the problem. Basso looked at him. Why are you searching outside? The master said. Your own treasure house is right here. Why are you looking elsewhere? Daiju did not understand. Where is my treasure house? And Baso said, very quietly, what you are now asking is your treasure house. At this, something opened in Daiju. The accounts say he was enlightened in that moment. We don't need to use that word if it sits uncomfortably. We can just say something shifted. Something that had been turned outward turned inward. Not toward what he thought of as himself, not toward his opinions, his history, his achievements, but toward the very act of looking, the awareness that was doing the searching all along. He wept, the stories say. Not from sadness, from something more like recognition. Afterward, Daiju would sometimes say to close friends, from the moment I opened my treasure house, I have been using it freely. What more could I need? This is a story I want to set down very gently and not explain too much, because it explains itself, and over-explaining it is exactly the kind of thing Baso would not do. But I'll say this one thing, and then we'll move on. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes from seeking, from the feeling that what you need is somewhere other than where you are. That clarity, or peace, or the right answer, or the version of yourself you're supposed to be, is just a little further along, in the next book, or the next practice, or the next year. That searching is exhausting. It has been exhausting you, probably, for longer than you remember. What you are now asking is your treasure house, not what you're going to find. What you are now doing, now, in this strange in-between space of almost asleep, is the thing itself. The looking is the light. You can stop pulling on the door now. It opens from the inside. The travelling monk had studied hard and thought carefully and arrived at what he believed was a sound philosophical position. All is mind. Everything that appears is a manifestation of mind. The cup is mind. The mountain is mind. The body is mind. This is not a strange position. Versions of it appear throughout the history of Buddhist philosophy, and the monk had good reasons for holding it. He arrived at the temple of the master Hogen and asked to spend the night. Before he left in the morning, Hogen pointed to a large stone in the garden, a heavy, grey, indifferent stone. Tell me, Hogen said, that stone, is it inside your mind or outside? The monk, committed to his position, answered without hesitation. Inside, Hogen nodded slowly. You must be very tired, he said, travelling with such a heavy stone in your mind. And the monk had no answer. This is the whole story. Nothing more happens. The monk stands in the garden with the stone, and Hogen goes back inside, and that is all the tradition chose to preserve. What I love about it, and I'll say this only quietly, is that Hogen doesn't argue. He doesn't refute the monk's philosophy. He doesn't say you're wrong, and here's why. He simply takes the monk's own position seriously and follows it to where it lives in the body. Are you carrying that stone? Is your back tired? You've been walking all day. How heavy is your mind? Philosophy, when it drifts too far from the body, becomes this: ideas we hold that don't weigh anything until someone asks us to actually carry them. And then we feel the weight. What are you carrying in your mind tonight? Not as a problem to solve, just as a weight to notice. Just for a moment, before you set it down the way Tanzan set down the girl at the crossing, the way Chiono's pail set down the moon. You can put it down anywhere. The ground will hold it. A student came to a master with something he considered a serious problem, possibly the most serious problem he had. He said, I have a terrible temper. I was born with it. I have had it my whole life, and it causes me endless trouble. I want to be rid of it. The master said, show it to me. The student looked slightly baffled. I can't show it to you right now. It comes on suddenly, and it isn't here at the moment. The master settled back. Then it is not truly part of you, he said. It comes and goes. If it were truly you, you would have it always. When anger is not here, who are you then? The student had no answer. He sat with this. Because the question is serious. If we are our bad qualities only when they're present, and something else when they're not, then who exactly is the one with the problem? The anger visits. The jealousy visits. The shame visits. They are powerful, and they hurt, and they cause real harm. None of that is being dismissed. But they visit. They are not the house. This is one of the quieter stories in the old collections, easy to pass over for the more dramatic ones. But it does something that the bigger stories can't quite do. It addresses, directly, the feeling of being at war with yourself. The feeling that there is something wrong with you, essentially, not situationally, but in your nature, your character, your bones. The master is not offering a cure. He is offering a reframing which is gentler and stranger than a cure. He is suggesting, look at the moments when the difficult thing is not present. Who is there in that stillness? That one, that quiet one, just behind all the weather, is at least as real as the storm. Tonight, right now, lying here, whatever has been difficult about your day has probably quieted somewhat. It may not be gone, but it's quieter. And the one lying here, breathing, beginning to let the darkness be comfortable, that one is real too. Let both be real, the storm and the one who waits for it to pass. And then there is this. Subhuti was a disciple of the Buddha, and he was known for his deep understanding of emptiness. Not just as a concept, not as a position to take in an argument, but as a lived quality of being. He had, over long years of practice, learned to rest in emptiness, not the emptiness of nothing, but the emptiness of nothing extra. The mind before the labels, the space that holds everything without being changed by any of it. One day he sat down under a tree in this state, just sitting, not teaching, not practicing, not performing anything, just sitting in the mood of openness, the way you might sit in a warm room and be the room for a while rather than a person in it. And then flowers began to fall. Softly, out of the air, petals drifting down around him. The accounts say the gods were dropping them. Whatever we make of that detail, the flowers came. And with them came a voice, or the sense of a voice. Something that carried the quality of a voice. We praise you, Subhuti, for your discourse on emptiness. Subhuti looked up, or around, or inward, it's hard to know which. But I have not spoken of emptiness, he said. And the voice answered, you have not spoken. We have not heard. This is true emptiness. And the flowers fell. I've been sitting with this story for a while, turning it over, and I don't want to hand you a meaning wrapped in a bow. What I'll say is this: the tradition is pointing at something that lives on the far side of even the most careful explanation. Subhuti was not teaching emptiness. He was being it. And something in the air recognized the difference between the word and the thing, between talking about open space and actually opening. This is not a thing you can do on purpose. That's precisely what the story is saying. You cannot decide to be empty. You cannot achieve open. The trying is itself the closing. But sometimes, in the half-dark before sleep, when the thinking mind is beginning to release its grip, when the day is almost done and the body is warm and the next thought keeps failing to arrive, sometimes the flowers come by themselves. Not because you earned them, not because you said the right things or understood correctly. Because you stopped and something that had been waiting quietly all along simply noticed. Let it notice now, if it wants to. The tree is here. The air is here. You don't have to say anything about emptiness. You don't have to say anything at all. Take a slow breath. Fill the body gently, and let it go gently. Notice, if you can, the small pause between the out-breath and the next in-breath. That pause has no name. It doesn't need one. It's just the space the breath lives in. The same way the parables live in the dark between two people. The same way something in you, call it what you like, or call it nothing, lives between one thought and the next. We've walked a long way tonight. Joshu's mu hangs in the air, one syllable, no answer needed. Toyo listened through all the sounds of the world and found the one that isn't quite a sound. Gute raised his single finger for 30 years and then, very gently, taught someone the difference between pointing and seeing. Young Teshu sat in a master's room and learned that anger is very real and philosophy is very real, and they are not always the same thing. Daiju discovered that his treasure house was already open, had always been open, and the searching was the only door. The monk in the garden is still out there somewhere, tired from carrying a stone in his mind. Someone's temper, yours maybe, or mine maybe, or just everyone's, is not at home tonight, and we're remembering who is. And Subhuti is sitting under his tree in the rain of flowers, not speaking a word about the thing that can't be spoken. These are the sideways ones. The ones that don't hand you an answer. They hand you the shape of the space where an answer might have been, and the space itself turns out to be the point. Don't try to hold them all. You were never supposed to. This is not a lecture, and there will be no test. The stories are just passing through, the way dreams do, the way the breath does, the way everything does, really, the way even the things we're most certain about are always, slowly, moving through. You are doing exactly what you should be doing. The river carries you. You don't have to swim. Something settles when we stop asking certain questions, not because we've answered them, because we've noticed that the question and the questioner are not as separate as we thought. Joshu's mu did not answer the monk's question about Buddha nature. It dissolved the kind of mind that was asking. One syllable. Nothing else was needed, and nothing else was given. The strange thing about these sideways stories, and I want to stay with this for a moment before we move on, is how wrong they look from the outside. A master who says nothing, or who raises one finger, or who pours tea over the edge of a full cup, or who hits you with a pipe and keeps smoking. From the outside, this looks like madness or cruelty or simple rudeness. From the inside, for the person who was there, it cracked something open that no explanation ever could. You cannot teach someone to wake up. You can only arrange circumstances so that waking becomes possible. That is all any of these masters were doing. Dokuon smoking in silence while Teishu's philosophy dissolved. Mokurai turning away Toyo's geisha music, his dripping water, his owls, his wind through the pine needles. Hogan pointing at the stone in the garden and waiting, very patiently, to see what kind of mind would try to carry it inside. They were arranging circumstances, clearing space, the way you might tilt a window open in a stuffy room, not creating the air, just making room for it to move. That is what this night is, perhaps, for you. A tilted window. A little clearing. You have not failed if nothing has opened. You have not succeeded if something has. These parables were carried in memory for centuries before anyone wrote them down, passed from teacher to student in rooms very much like darkness, and they worked not by being understood, but by being held. The way you hold a smooth stone in your hand while you fall asleep, without thinking about the stone, just feeling its weight and its coolness until your hand forgets it is there. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders fall somewhere they maybe haven't been all day. Notice the parts of your body that have already given in. The jaw, perhaps, or the backs of your hands, or the space behind your eyes. You don't need to relax them deliberately. Just notice. Noticing is enough. The body knows what to do when the mind stops insisting on directing things. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a teaching that sits very quietly inside the flower shower, the last of the sideways parables we have walked through tonight. Subhuti is sitting under his tree. He is not performing emptiness. He is not concentrating on it or holding it in front of him like a lamp. He is simply sitting in the way that a person sits when they have stopped needing the moment to be different than it is, and the flowers come. And the gods bend close and ask, "What was your discourse on emptiness?" And Subhuti says, "I have not spoken." And the gods say, "We have not heard." And this nothing passed between one being and another, freely given, fully received, neither grasped nor turned away, this, they say, is the real thing. I have sat with that story for a long time. Not the idea of it, the feeling of it. There is something in it about what it means to give without giving, to receive without receiving, to have a conversation that leaves both people lighter rather than heavier. We spend so much time in conversations that leave us heavier. The ones we replay in the dark, adding sharper answers we didn't have in the moment, smoothing the edges of things we said that came out wrong, rehearsing what we should have done. Subhuti under his tree is not doing any of that. He is just there. He said nothing, and something was given. He received nothing, and something arrived. What would it feel like to have nothing to defend tonight? Not because the things that happened today didn't happen. Not because the difficulty isn't real. But because the self that feels the need to stand guard, to rehearse, to protect itself, that self grows very tired, and it has been standing there all day, and it does not have to stand there now, in the dark. While you are going somewhere the waking mind cannot follow anyway. The temper that wasn't home when the student looked for it. The treasure house Daiju carried without knowing he was carrying it. The stone in the mind that turned out to be so heavy once someone named it plainly. These are not exactly metaphors. Or they are metaphors the way everything is a metaphor, a finger pointing at something that is not the finger. Don't look at the finger. You know this already. Some part of you has always known. The stories are just a voice calling that part back toward the surface, the way a familiar sound in another room can, without waking you fully, pull you gently closer to where you already are. You are lying in the dark. The dark is not empty. It is full of something very old and very patient that has no need to explain itself to anyone. It was here before the stories. The stories are just one of the doors it sometimes comes through. The river is still moving. You don't have to know where it goes. There is a story about a man named Shichiri Kojun who was known for his deep practice of reciting sutras. He lived simply. He kept almost nothing. One night, as he sat in the quiet of his small room, reading aloud in the lamplight, a thief slipped through the door. The thief held a sharp sword. His face was not kind. Shichiri Kojun looked up. He did not stop reading. He looked at the man with the sword the way you might look at someone you had been expecting. He said, Do not make noise. My neighbors are sleeping. He paused. There is money in that drawer. Take what you need, but please leave a little. I must pay taxes tomorrow. The thief was, you could say, surprised. He took most of the money. He moved toward the door. Shichiri Kojin looked up again. Thank a person, he said quietly, when you receive a gift. The thief bowed. He left. Some days later, this man was caught. Not for what he had done at Shichiri Kojin's house, but for other things. When the magistrate asked him about his crimes, he listed them. And he mentioned the monk's house. The magistrate called Shichiri Kojin to verify this. Shichiri Kojin said, I do not know this man as a thief. He came to my house, I gave him money, and he thanked me. He is not a thief to me. The man, on hearing this, wept. When he had served his time, he returned. He became a disciple of Shichiri Kojin and studied for many years. There is nothing to explain here. A door was opened by the one who should have been afraid to open it. That is all. We carry, most of us, a careful accounting, what we are owed, what has been taken, what was not given freely. The accounting is exhausting. Shichiri Kojin simply did not keep it. Not because he was saintly in some distant way, but because something in him had grown very quiet. And in that quiet there was room for a frightened man with a sword to also be, without contradiction, someone who might one day bow. Let the accounting rest tonight. Just for now, just while you are here. Take a slow breath. The room is still. Everything you owe and everything owed to you can stay exactly where it is until morning. There is nothing to settle tonight. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a story that takes 30 years to tell. A man named Zenkai had once been a samurai. He had done something he could not undo. A man was dead because of him, and afterward he could not find a way to live with what he had done. He ran. He travelled. He became a wandering monk. But the thing he had done followed him the way shadows follow in the afternoon, long and insistent. He came eventually to a mountain pass where travellers were often hurt, even killed. The road was steep, the cliff treacherous. People had fallen. And Zenkai, living alone in a small hut nearby, made a decision. He would dig a tunnel through the cliff. He would make the road safe. He had no one to help him. He had simple tools. He began to dig. He dug for 30 years. He dug in the mornings before the light came. He dug in the evenings. He accepted food from passing travellers and gave back nothing but continued digging. He grew old in the digging. He did not speak much. There was not much to say. When the tunnel was more than half finished, the son of the man he had killed arrived. The son had heard where Zenkai was. He had come to avenge his father's death, and he carried his father's sword, and he had waited a long time to use it. Zenkai looked at him. You have the right to take my life, he said. But first, please, let me finish this work. When the tunnel is complete, you can do what you came to do. The son, who had not expected this, agreed. He waited. The days passed. And then, because there was nothing else to do, because Zenkai was old, and the work was slow, and the mountain was large, the son began to help. He picked up a tool. He dug alongside Zenkai without speaking. The weeks passed. More days. The mountain gave way, stone by stone, and something happened in the digging that could not be named precisely. They worked beside each other. Zenkai did not ask for forgiveness. The son did not give it. They just dug. And when the tunnel broke through, when the light came from the far side, and the road was finally safe, and travellers could pass without falling, the son stood there with his tools still in his hands, and looked at the old monk beside him, and could not find the word he had come with. It had worn away somewhere in the mountain. "I cannot kill you now," he said. Zenkai bowed. "I am ready to die whenever you wish it." He meant this. He had been ready for 30 years. The sun did not kill him. He wept instead, and went home. And it is said the tunnel is still there. What do you do with something you cannot undo? The teaching is quiet about this, but it is not silent. It says, you dig. You make something useful out of the time that remains. You do not wait to be forgiven before you begin to work. Forgiveness, if it comes of itself, in its own time, the way the far side of a mountain comes, not because you demanded it, but because you kept going. You cannot know tonight which of the difficult things will finish this way. Perhaps none of them. Perhaps the digging is what you have. Rest now for a moment. Just set the tools down. You have been digging in your own way today, and the mountain is patient, and the tunnel is still there in the morning. There is a story about Bankei Yotaku, who lived from 1622 to 1693, and who spent much of his later life teaching anyone who came, which was many people. His retreats were crowded, his reputation was wide. During one such retreat, a student was caught stealing. Word moved through the group the way bad news moves, quickly and with a kind of energy that surprised everyone with how much they cared. The other students came to Bankei with a document. They had written down their grievance and signed it. They wanted the thief expelled. Some of them were very serious about this. Some of them had also written that if the thief were not expelled, they themselves would leave. Bankei read the document. He set it down. You, he said, looking at the others, are very wise students. You know right from wrong. If you leave, you will be fine. You can go anywhere and continue your practice. You know how to do it. He paused. But this man, he gestured toward the one who had stolen. He does not yet know right from wrong. If I send him away, who will teach him? I cannot let him go. He needs me more than you do. The student who had stolen wept. He never stole again. He studied for many years. The others stayed. This is the thing about those who already know the rule. They do not always need the teacher most urgently. The one who cannot follow the rule, who does not yet understand why the rule is even a rule, that one is still carrying something very heavy, and perhaps they need a hand, not a closed door. We are all, at some point, the one who got things wrong. The one who took something, said something, did something we would undo if we could. The one who does not quite understand yet why the thing we did was wrong. Bankei kept room for that person. He refused to let the counting of rights expel the one who most needed to be counted. There is room for you here tonight, however today went. Let the breath go slowly. The dark does not ask for credentials, it simply receives you. There is a story about Ryokan, the hermit poet who lived from 1758 to 1831, and about his nephew. His nephew had grown into someone difficult. He drank, he gambled, he spent money he did not have on things he did not need, and he was making his family miserable, and everyone in the family had already said everything there was to say. They had argued, they had pleaded, they had threatened. The nephew had heard all of it and continued. Someone in the family asked Ryokan. Ryokan was Ryokan's uncle. Perhaps Ryokan could speak to him. Ryokan was known to be gentle and strange, and possibly wise. Ryokan travelled to the nephew's house. He arrived, and the nephew greeted him with some wariness, because he had heard enough speeches for one life and did not want another. Ryokan said nothing about the gambling, nothing about the drinking, nothing about the money. He sat in the nephew's house and shared the evening meal and talked about small things, ordinary things, and then it grew late, and they slept. In the morning, Ryokan prepared to leave. He put on his sandals at the door, moving slowly. He was old, and his hands were not quite what they had been. And he paused, and without looking up he said very quietly, "I must be getting old. My hands shake a little now. Would you help me tie this sandal?" The nephew knelt down. He tied his uncle's sandal, and as he did, a single tear fell from Ryokan's eye onto the nephew's hand. That was all. Ryokan left. He said nothing more. The nephew changed his life. Slowly, and not all at once, and probably with difficulty, but he changed. Not because he was given a better argument, not because someone finally said the right words in the right order, but because an old man's hand shook, and a tear fell, and the nephew suddenly understood in his body what he had not understood in his head. That time was passing, that the people he loved were aging, that he was wasting something he could not get back. The truth that changes people is almost never the truth that is announced. It arrives the way Ryokan arrived, quietly, without agenda, sitting with you through the ordinary evening, and then, at the door, showing you without words what words had not been able to show. What is trying to reach you tonight without words? There is always something. Let it be here. It does not need to be understood to be felt. There is a story about a monk named Tetsugen Doko, who was born in 1630 and died in 1682, and who had a very large dream. He wanted to print the Buddhist sutras in Japanese. This had not been done before in a comprehensive way, and it would cost a great deal of money, and Tetsugen had none. He began to travel and collect donations. It took years. People gave what they could, some very little, some more, and slowly the funds grew, and Tetsugen kept careful account of everything. And then there was a famine. The famine was severe and spreading, and people were dying, and Tetsugen looked at the money he had collected, all those years of it, all those small gifts from all those hands, and he gave it away, all of it, to feed people. The sutras would have to wait. He began again. More years of travel, more donations. The fund grew again. And then a great flood came. The rivers broke their banks. People were displaced and drowning and cold. Tetsugen gave away the money again. Everything, again, to help with the flood. He began a third time. This time he finished. The sutras were printed. The books exist. You can see them still in Kyoto, preserved in a temple. But what the teachers say is this: the first printing and the second printing, the ones that never happened, the ones that became food in a famine and shelter after a flood, those were the superior editions. Those were, in a sense, the real sutras. Not the ones you can hold and read, but the ones that cannot be held, that moved through the world in the form of bread and dry blankets and a little warmth in a terrible year. Tetsugen did not argue about this. He just began again and again. There are things we keep setting aside and returning to. Projects, practices, intentions. We think of the interruptions as the enemy of the thing. But sometimes the interruption is the thing. Sometimes what we give away in the middle of the plan we had to abandon in order to do what was needed, sometimes that is the addition that cannot be purchased and cannot be catalogued and cannot be lost. Whatever you have set aside and returned to, it is not behind. It is not less than it might have been. It is already the first and second printing. Sleep takes you away from the plan every night and brings you back, and the plan is still there in the morning. This is not interruption. This is the practice. There is a story about a wrestler named Onami, which means great waves. Onami was, by any measure, formidable. His body was large and his strength was exceptional. and in private bouts against his teachers he won. Not once or twice, he won consistently. He was, in the private hours of training, genuinely difficult to defeat. And yet in public tournaments, in front of crowds and judges and the formal apparatus of competition, he lost. Every time. Something happened when the eyes of strangers turned toward him. He shrank. The very thing that made him powerful in private seemed to leave him the moment it was witnessed. He went to a Zen master and told him this. The master listened. He said, "Tonight, after everyone has gone to sleep, stay here in the shrine room, sit and breathe, and be the waves. Not a man thinking about waves, not a man trying to imagine waves. Be the ocean that is making them. Be the water that becomes the wave and recedes and becomes the wave again. Let the waves rise in you. Let them sweep the room. Let them move through the walls and down the mountain and across the plain. Let there be nothing in this room that the waves do not reach." Onami sat. At first there were thoughts, the tournament, the judges, the faces watching. But the master had said be the waves, and so he returned to the waves. The waves came slowly at first. Then they grew. By the middle of the night, the room was full of them. Not real water, but something as real water, a tide in his chest and his spine and his hands, rising and falling and rising. He sat in a temple that was also the sea. By dawn he was the waves. He never lost again. What was taken away in public was not his strength, it was his knowledge of what he was. He thought he was Onami, a man trying to win, and a man trying to win can be watched and judged and found wanting. But the waves cannot be judged. The waves do not perform. They are simply what they are, whether or not anyone is watching. You are, tonight, not being watched. You do not have to perform. You do not have to be anything other than the thing you already are in the dark, which is breathing, warm, here. The waves rise and fall in you, whether you name them or not. They do not need your permission. Let them move. There is a story about a young man named Matajuro who wanted more than anything to become a great swordsman. He went to the famous teacher Banzo and asked to be taught. Banzo looked at him for a long time. "How long," Banzo said, "will it take to make me a master?" Matajuro said, "Perhaps 10 years?" "That is too long," Banzo said. "If I work very hard, what then?" Banzo said, 20 years. Matajuro, confused, said, "Why does working harder make it longer?" Banzo said, "Because with one eye fixed on the destination and one eye fixed on how hard you are working, you only have no eyes left to actually practice." He took Matajuro in. He gave him no sword to practice with. He gave him pots to wash and rice to cook and wood to cut and floors to sweep. Matajuro did these things. Months passed. A year. He began to grow discouraged because no one was teaching him anything about swords. And then Banzo began to strike him. Without warning, at any moment when Matajuro was washing the pots, a sword would appear from nowhere and he would have to dodge or be struck. While he was cooking, a blow from behind. While he was sleeping, a strike to wake him. At first, Matajuro was hit constantly. But gradually, without knowing he was learning, without studying in the formal sense, he began to sense the strikes before they came. He learned to live in a state of complete, undecorated alertness. Not the anxious alertness of someone watching for danger, but something quieter, an aliveness in the body, a presence without object. He was not looking for the strike, he simply was always there, in the moment, in the way that water is always wet. After years of this, just this, nothing but the ordinary work and the unexpected strikes and the gradual waking of the whole body, he became the greatest swordsman in Japan. There is a kind of attention that cannot be hurried, that grows sideways, in the dark, while you are doing something else. The mind that tries to acquire it is the mind that prevents it. The way to it is not through effort directed at it, but through the quality of ordinary presence brought to ordinary things. You were washing dishes today, or typing, or walking, or doing the small and unremarkable things that make up most of a day. And if you were, even sometimes, actually there, not planning, not reviewing, just there, then something was being sharpened that cannot be named and will not fit in a trophy case. Let the body remember that it has been present today, even if only a moment. That moment is real. It counts. There is a story about a student named Tenno who had studied for 10 years and believed himself to be reasonably accomplished. He went to visit a certain master. It was raining. He removed his clogs at the door. He left his umbrella at the entrance. He went in and spent time in conversation with the master, which was pleasant, and he left feeling that things had gone well. At the door, the master asked him one question. Which side of the door did you leave your umbrella on? Tenno could not remember. He searched his mind and found nothing there, just the vague impression of having arrived, of the rain, of the threshold. He could not recall which side. He could not even recall how he had held the umbrella as he set it down. He went home that night and understood that 10 years had not taught him what he thought they had taught him. He had been going through the motions of practice. He had been practicing in the times set aside for practice, and then releasing his attention the moment practice was officially over, as though the teaching only applied in designated locations. He returned to his teacher. He stayed another 10 years, not to learn more complicated things, but to learn this, that the moment you pass through a door is as real as the moment you sit down to meditate. That how you set down an umbrella in the rain is the same question as how you meet a thought in stillness. That there is no threshold where attention can be left at the door. Every minute Zen, the teachers call it. Not just meditation minute Zen or important moment Zen. Every minute. The umbrella was only the umbrella, but it was also the test. And the test had no scheduled time. You are here now. You noticed, just now, what it felt like to read those words. That is every minute. That is enough. You do not need to maintain it or grasp it. Just note that it was here, and let it go. There is a teaching about the nature of insults and what becomes of them when they are not received. An old samurai had been known for many years as a man of great discipline and equanimity. Word of this had spread, and a young challenger heard it and decided to test it. He sought out the old man and began, in public, to insult him. Directly, loudly, without subtlety. He said unflattering things. He questioned the man's courage. He stood close and spoke the kind of words that are designed to enter through the skin. The old samurai did not respond. He looked at the young man with something that was not anger and was not contempt. He looked, and then he turned and walked away. The young man followed, insisting, more words. The samurai kept walking. Eventually the young man gave up. A student who had watched this asked the old samurai how he had remained so calm. Wasn't he furious? The samurai thought for a moment. If someone brings you a gift, he said, and you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The student said, to the one who offered it. Yes, the old samurai said. And that was all. The words were offered. They were not taken. They remained entirely with the one who had spent the effort of bringing them. This does not mean that nothing can reach you. Things reach everyone. But there is a space, however narrow, between the word arriving and you're receiving it. In that space, something is possible. Not the performance of not being hurt, that is its own kind of weight, just the simple recognition that the gift need not be opened, that some things may be handed back, still wrapped, without ceremony. Whatever was offered to you today that was not kind, you do not have to carry it into sleep. You can set it at the door. It does not belong to you. It never quite did. There is a story that is a little funny in the quiet way that Zen stories are sometimes funny. 4 students decided to meditate together in total silence. No speaking. They would sit through the night without a word. This was the vow. The evening came. They sat. A lamp was lit to give a little light, and the hours passed and the silence held. And then the lamp began to dim. The oil was running low, the flame wavered and shrank, and the room was getting darker. The first student, unable to help himself, said, "Someone should fix that lamp." There was a horrified silence. Then the second student said, "We are not supposed to speak." A longer silence. Then the third student said, "Why did the 2 of you talk? You are both very foolish." And then a very long silence indeed. And then the fourth student said, "With great satisfaction, I am the only one who has not spoken." There they all were. None of them were wrong. Exactly, the lamp did need attention. The vow had been broken. The breaking was worth naming. And the fourth student had in fact spoken fewer words than the others, which is technically true. But the vow was not about fewer words. It was about something else, something that cannot be defended or measured or won. And the moment the defending began, the thing was already gone. We know this tendency so well that we do not have to be reminded of it. The part of us that notices we have done something right and immediately announces it. The voice that says, silently or not so silently, "I am the only one who has not spoken." It is a very human voice. It means no harm. It is just very busy. And tonight, in the dark, perhaps it can rest a little. No one needs to be the only one who has not spoken. The silence does not require a witness. There is a story about the child Ikkyu, who would grow into Ikkyu Sojun, one of the most irreverent and beloved Zen masters of his age, born in 1394 and dying in 1481. When Ikkyu was a boy studying at a temple, his teacher owned a beautiful cup. Very old, very fine. The teacher was known to love this cup. He mentioned it sometimes. He handled it with unusual care. And one day, in some ordinary way that these things happen, Ikkyu broke it. He was holding the pieces when he heard the teacher's footsteps approaching. He stood, thinking quickly, and when the teacher appeared, Ikkyu asked, in the most innocent voice he could manage, "Teacher, why must people die?" The teacher looked at the boy and said, "This is the natural order of things. Everything that comes into being must eventually pass away. When the time comes for something to end, it ends. This is not a tragedy. This is simply the truth." Ikkyu nodded gravely. He held out his hands and opened them, and the pieces of the broken cup were there. "The time had come for your cup," he said. The teacher, who was also human, presumably felt several things at once. The story does not record what he said next, but the lesson that Ikkyu absorbed, not just performed but genuinely held, was this: the cup was always going to break. It broke every day, in a sense, from the moment it was made. Its breaking was built into it from the beginning. The only question was which moment would be the named one. This applies to everything. The thing you love, the state you are in, the version of yourself that feels most real tonight, all of it is already mid-passage. Nothing is stuck at fixed. Everything is moving at the speed that everything moves. Ikkyu spent the rest of his long life refusing to pretend otherwise. He drank. He wrote poetry about desire. He laughed at ceremony. He loved things fully, without the protective distance that says, "I will not love this too much, because it will end." He loved things exactly as much as they deserved to be loved, because they were going to end anyway, and the loving was the whole point. The cup was always going to break, but while it held water, it held water. You are here tonight. Breathing, the day that is ending, and the one before it is already somewhere you cannot find it, and the ones ahead of this one are not yet formed. There is only this breath, this dark, this particular stillness that belongs only to tonight, which will also pass and will also, someday, be one of the broken things you were glad to have held. Hold it now. You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it be here. 11 stories. 11 small rooms walked through tonight. The thief who became a disciple. The monk who dug for 30 years. The teacher who would not close the door. The uncle whose hands shook at the threshold. The sutras that became bread and shelter before they became pages. The wrestler who learned to be the ocean. The swordsman who found alertness in the act of washing. The student who could not remember his own umbrella. The samurai who simply did not open the package. The 4 who broke the silence about not breaking the silence, and the child who let the cup's time come and opened his hands. They are not separate rooms, really. They connect the way water connects, not by argument, but by finding the same level. A thread runs through all of them that has to do with what happens when you stop guarding, stop performing, stop defending, stop arriving, stop trying to be the one who has not spoken. Something opens. It is not dramatic. It rarely looks like anything at all from the outside, but it opens. The river is still moving. You have come a long way through the water tonight. There is still more. A few more stories ahead, quieter ones, and then the far bank, but there is no hurry, and if sleep finds you before you reach it, that is exactly as it should be. The stories will be here. The water will be here. Everything you need is already somewhere in what you have heard, and you do not need to remember any of it to carry it. Let the breath go a little longer now. Let the body settle further into whatever is holding it. The mind can still be here, or it can begin to drift. Both are welcome. Neither is wrong. We are going somewhere you already know how to go. There is a story told about a teacher who in the middle of the afternoon would close his eyes and sleep. His students would find him like that sometimes, sitting upright on his cushion, breathing slowly, gone somewhere behind his closed face. And when he returned, blinking and calm, he would say that he had gone to dreamland. That was the word he used. Dreamland. He said he went there to meet the old sages, Confucius and the others who had thought deeply about how to live, and that these meetings were valuable to him, worth the sleeping. His students accepted this, the way students accept many things. One afternoon a few of them were caught by their teacher doing precisely what he did, sitting on their cushions, eyes shut, breathing slowly. He stood before them for a moment and then asked, in a tone that was not entirely without amusement, what they were doing. "We went to dreamland," they said, "to meet the old sages, just as you do." He regarded them for a moment. Then he asked what the sages had said. They thought about this. One of them said, carefully, that the sages had spoken of patience. Another said they had discussed the nature of the mind. There was a small silence. He waited. And then one of them, unable to hold it any longer, said what was true. The sages said they had never seen any such teacher visiting them. He left the room without speaking. What remains of that story is not its lesson. There is no lesson here to carry home in your pocket. What remains is the image, a few young people with their eyes closed, making their own small bid for the thing their teacher had, and the gap between trying to be wise and being willing to be seen. And somewhere behind it, the gentlest suggestion that dreamland does not care about credentials. It takes you as you are. It takes you as you are right now, in fact, with your eyes already going soft and the thread of the story loosening a little in your hands. That is all dreamland has ever asked of anyone. Nothing more than that. Let the breath settle. You are already most of the way there. There was a master named Bankei who lived from 1622 to 1693, and who had a reputation in his time for drawing large crowds, monks and laypeople, scholars and farmers, sometimes even students who had belonged to other teachers and drifted toward his talks the way water drifts downhill, without deciding to. A priest from a nearby temple grew annoyed by this. His own congregation had thinned. People who had sat with him for years were now walking past his hall to hear Bankei instead. He decided to confront the matter directly, which is perhaps the most human of all responses to having your crowd stolen, to show up and argue. He came to one of Bankei's talks and announced, with some pride, that his own tradition taught its masters to perform miracles. His teacher could stand on one bank of a river while a student held a brush on the other, and the teacher's mind would move the brush to write characters without anyone touching it. He said this as evidence that his way was superior. Bankei listened. Then he said, quietly, that he could not do that particular thing. But, he said, my miracle is this: when I feel hungry, I eat. When I feel thirsty, I drink. The priest had no answer for this. Not because the answer was obvious, it is not obvious at all, or we would not still be thinking about it centuries later, but because the answer went somewhere the argument could not follow. What Bankei was pointing at was not modesty. It was not self-deprecation. He was pointing at the same thing the bowl of rice had been pointing at when Joshu said wash it, the same thing the water was pointing at when the pail's bottom fell away. The ordinary as it actually is. Not the ordinary as a consolation prize for people who cannot levitate. The ordinary as the whole of it. Presence meeting itself moment by moment, without the gap of performance between the hungry person and the eating. You know what this is, even if you have no words for it. You have felt it. There are moments, rare and quiet, when you are doing something simple, walking or washing your hands, or lying in the dark listening, and there is no distance between you and the doing. The person is not separate from the act. And in those moments, something rests that is usually running. Bankei would say that is the miracle, the one he had, the one that did not require the other bank at all. You do not need to figure out what he meant. Let it sit in the body like warmth from a cup held in both hands, and drift further if you are ready. There was a master named Sengai Gibbon who lived from 1750 to 1837. He was known for his calligraphy and his humour, and for an answer he once gave to a wealthy man who came to ask for something to mark an occasion. The man had built a prosperous life, real estate, or the Edo-era equivalent, trade and property, and the kind of settled comfort that accumulates over time. He had a large family and a house full of people he loved, and he wanted something from the master that his family could hang on the wall, something that would speak to the continuity of their good fortune, the wish that it would go on and on for generations. Sengai took his brush. He wrote 4 Chinese characters: father dies, son dies, grandson dies. The wealthy man read them. His face went through several things in quick succession. He had expected something different. Something about flourishing, perhaps, longevity, the crane and the pine. He said with considerable feeling that this was a terrible thing to write for a man who had asked about the family's continued prosperity. He was, in fact, furious. Senzaki looked at him with complete calm. "If your son were to die before you," he said, "that would be grief beyond any fortune. If your grandson were to die before your son, that would be grief beyond measure. But father dies, and then son dies, and then grandson dies. This is the natural order of the world. This is your prosperity. To have it in the right sequence. To have that much time, each of you, before it is the next one's turn." The wealthy man stood there. The characters on the paper were the same characters. But they had become something entirely different. They had become a blessing. This is perhaps the strangest reversal in tonight's collection. A death wish that is the truest form of a wish for life, a list of losses that is the most honest form of luck. Hold it lightly if it asks too much right now. You do not need to open every door. But somewhere in the quieter part of you, there may be something that recognizes this, that the natural order of things, held all the way through, is not a tragedy. That going in the right direction, even toward an ending, is a kind of grace. That father dies, son dies, grandson dies, is a story told by someone who loved their family enough to tell them the truth about time. Let the breath go long. The mind can follow wherever it goes. There is one more story tonight about Ryokan, the monk poet who lived from 1758 to 1831 in a small hut on a mountain, who played with children and wrote verse and owned almost nothing. You have already met him, or the ghost of him, in what came before. But this story belongs to a different night, a different hour of darkness. He came home one evening to find a thief inside his hut. This was not difficult to discover. The hut was small and contained very little. The thief had gotten there first and had already looked everywhere there was to look. And what he found was what was there to find, which was nearly nothing. He was still in the process of leaving, empty-handed, when Ryokan arrived, and there was a moment between them. The particular awkward silence of two people who have arrived at a situation neither of them entirely planned. Ryokan did not call out, did not threaten, did not reach for anything. He looked at the thief, and then he took off his own robe and held it out. He said, "You have come all this way. I wish I had more to give you. Please take this." The thief took the robe. "What else do you do?" and left quickly into the dark. Ryokan sat down in his empty hut, which was now slightly more empty than before, and looked out through the doorway at the night sky. He had a moon. He wrote, or said, or it was found among his verses later, "Poor fellow, I wish I could give him this beautiful moon." That is the whole of it. There is no trick, no reversal, no lesson written at the bottom. Only the image of a man sitting in a hut that has been taken from, looking at the one thing no one can carry away, and feeling, of all things, a tenderness for the person who came looking for something he did not have. You are lying somewhere in the dark right now, and somewhere above you, or behind the ceiling, the same moon is doing what the moon does. It has been doing it for every story told tonight, for every story told for thousands of years, and no one has ever managed to give it away or have it stolen. And everyone who has ever looked at it has looked at the same thing, and nothing about that has ever been diminished by the sharing. That is something. In the quiet. That is quite a lot. The story of Kakua is a short one, which suits the hour. He was the first Japanese student to go to China and study Zen at a time when the journey was long and the sea between them was not a small thing. He spent years there and then returned home, carrying whatever he had gathered, which is to say, he carried it invisibly, the way you always carry the true things, inside you, with no obvious shape on the outside. He had been gone long enough that his return was a matter of some interest. The emperor heard of it and summoned him to speak about his understanding. This was the sort of occasion that required preparation, or at least it seemed like one. A court, an emperor, years of study across a sea, it called for a discourse, an accounting, some articulation of what Zen is and what it does and what it had given him. Kakua stood before the emperor. He reached into his robe and drew out a small flute. He brought it to his lips and blew one short note, a single sound, brief and clean, and then gone. He bowed. Then he disappeared back into the mountains and was not seen again. This is what he had to say about his understanding. One note, the silence before it and the silence after it, which are not two silences, but one continuous silence that the note briefly named. No explanation, no doctrine, no translation of the years into words that an emperor or anyone else could add to their library. Just the note itself, and then the mountain. You do not need to understand this. You are already inside it, actually, in the space between one breath and the next, in the small gap of quiet between one thought arriving and the next one beginning. That is the flute note. It is always playing. It plays without anyone's help, and it stops for no one, and Kakua's years of study across a sea brought him back to the place where he could point at it and then bow and leave. One note, and then the mountain. Let the breath come and go. One note, over and over. The same one, always. There is a very old parable that was told as a teaching of the Buddha, though it belongs to the kind of story that has no single origin because it is true in every place it has ever been told. A man was crossing a field when he saw a tiger. He ran. The tiger came after him. He came to the edge of a cliff and grabbed hold of a vine and swung himself down over the edge, hanging there, and the tiger waited above him. Pacing, he looked down. At the bottom of the cliff, another tiger was already there, looking up. He held the vine. Two mice appeared, one white, one black, and began to gnaw at the vine where it met the earth above him. He looked. There on the cliff face, right beside him, a wild strawberry had found some way to grow. Its fruit hung there, small and red, and without letting go of the vine he reached out and plucked it and put it in his mouth. How sweet it tasted. That is the story. The tiger above, the tiger below, the vine being eaten through, and the strawberry. You will have heard versions of this before, perhaps. The two mice are sometimes said to be day and night. The tigers are sometimes said to be birth and death. Sometimes no one says anything and leaves the image to mean whatever it means for whoever is holding it tonight. There is room for all of it. What stays, in the quiet, is not the tigers. It is not even the vine. It is the reaching out, the plucking, the taste of something sweet and real in a moment that had no business containing sweetness, and contained it anyway. Not in spite of the tigers. Not after the tigers have been dealt with. In the middle of all of it, exactly as it is. You are alive right now. The breath moves. Something holds you, though you could not say exactly what. And somewhere in the moment that is actually happening, not the ones coming, not the ones already past, but this one, the only one there ever really is. Something good is available. Even now. even tonight. You do not have to name it. You have already tasted it. Rest now. A master named Mokugan was dying. His students gathered. This is what students do. There is something in us that wants to be present at the edge of things, wants to receive whatever last transmission might be available, to witness the teacher all the way to the final silence. So they came and sat with him, and he lay among them, and the room held what it always holds in those moments, grief and love, and the particular texture of attention that comes when you know someone is leaving. Mokugan had never smiled easily. That is worth saying plainly. Throughout his life, as a teacher, he had been known for his seriousness, the kind that is not harshness, but is a form of care. The care that does not sweeten what it does not know. He had not smiled at his students the way some teachers smile. He had met them in other ways. A student who loved him asked, in that quiet, dying room, if someone would strike the gong. Someone did. A mallet to the bell, and the sound that came was what the gong always gave when it was struck well, clear, and round, and rising and then slowly dissolving, giving way to itself in the air, becoming silence only gradually, the way a stone becomes still water. A sound that is already on its way somewhere else the moment it arrives. Mokugan heard it. He smiled. It was the first time. In all the years his students had known him, all the teachings, all the intensity of his presence, it was the first time any of them had seen his face do that. And then, having smiled, he was gone. What passed between Mokugan and that sound, no one can say. Maybe nothing needs to be said. Maybe the sound came, and the aging ear received it. And something in the old teacher that had been held for a whole life long recognized itself in the way a clear note rises and lets go and does not grasp at its own echo. Maybe all the discipline and seriousness of those years was the preparation for a single moment of dissolution, hearing oneself in a bell, in the last available moment, and releasing completely, smiling the way water smiles when it joins the river. You do not need to earn that smile. You do not need years in a monastery. The gong is sounding now, in whatever way this moment sounds, and it is already telling you what Mokugan heard. You only have to be here. You only have to be this. And now, for the last story of the night, we travel a little sideways in tradition. I want to be honest with you about that. This one does not come from the Zen masters or the classical collections of the Chan lineage. It is older and of a different origin, a story from the Huainanzi, a Chinese text from the 2nd century before the Common Era, rooted in Taoist wisdom rather than Zen. But it has been told beside these Zen stories for so long, and it belongs so naturally to what this night has been moving toward, that to omit it would be its own kind of loss. Think of it as a guest at the table who arrived from a different country and fit in so well that eventually no one remembered to ask where they were from. There was a farmer who lived near the border. One day his horse ran away. His neighbours came to express their sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said. "You must be devastated." The old farmer listened and then said, quietly maybe. A few days later the horse returned, and it had brought with it a small herd of wild horses. The neighbours came back. "What wonderful fortune," they said. "You must be overjoyed." The old farmer said maybe. The farmer's son, trying to tame one of the wild horses, was thrown and broke his leg. The neighbours came to offer condolences. "How terrible," they said. "What bad luck. What a tragedy." "Maybe," said the farmer. Not long after, army conscriptors came through the region, taking young men to fight in a war. They passed the farmer's son by because his leg was broken. His neighbours came and said, "How fortunate, how lucky, your son is spared." "Maybe," said the farmer. And that is where the story ends. Not with a resolution, not with a final verdict about the fortune or its opposite. Only the farmer at his gate, or in his field, or sitting in the doorway of his house at nightfall, with the same word for every turn of the wheel. Maybe it is not passivity. It is not resignation. The farmer still tended his land, his son still lay in bed with a mending leg, the horses still needed to be cared for. None of that stopped happening. But the farmer had found something that the neighbours had not found, which was that the story is always longer than the page you are currently on. The thing that looks like an ending is usually a middle. The thing that looks like ruin is sometimes a gate. And the thing that looks like luck is sometimes the horse that leads you toward a broken leg that saves you from a war. We cannot see far enough to know. And the farmer, having lived long enough to watch the wheel turn many times, had simply stopped pretending that he could. Maybe carry that word with you tonight if it is of use. Not as a way of not caring, but as a kind of gentleness toward the part of you that is trying, even now, to know how things will go. That part of you has worked very hard today. It is allowed to rest. It does not need to figure anything else out before morning. Whatever today brought, the turn that felt like luck, the turn that felt like disaster, the 100 small things that went one way instead of another. All of it is still unfinished. The story is longer than tonight. And you do not need to know the ending to lie down and close your eyes. "Maybe," says the farmer, and the gate stands open and the horses come and go. You have come a long way tonight, farther than you perhaps knew you would go when you first lay down and began to listen. You do not need to remember any of it. I want to say that plainly, and mean it. Not one name, not one crossing, not one cup or pail or flute note or strawberry. These things were never meant to be remembered the way you remember a list. They were meant to move through you the way water moves through a landscape, leaving something changed and then passing on. You will not find them on an exam. No one is coming to ask you what Kakua said to the emperor or which side of the road Tanzan put the young woman down. But somewhere in the body, in the quieter geography of a person who has been lying still for a long time and listening, something has shifted, something has settled. It always does, with enough stories. The mind cannot argue with a story the way it argues with a proposition, because a story does not make a claim, it only shows you something, and then goes quiet, and lets you sit with what you saw. You sat tonight with a professor whose cup ran over, and maybe felt the weight of your own full cup, all the things you came in already knowing, and maybe felt it lighten a little. You sat with 2 monks on a muddy road, and whatever you are still carrying from today, the weight of a conversation, the residue of something that did not go as you hoped, you are allowed to set it down now. The road is a long time behind you. Open your hands. You sat with a nun in the dark, holding a pail, and heard the bottom give way, and watched the moon go back to where it always was. You sat with a master who endured the village's contempt for a 1.5 years, and met it with the same 2 words every time, and maybe felt some mercy for the part of yourself that is also being unfairly held to account for something right now, and maybe heard something in his steadiness. You sat with a monk who washed his bowl and found that this was sufficient, that the ordinary, met fully, was the teaching itself. You sat in dreamland with students who could not quite dream their way to the old sages, and found that this too was perfect, to be caught gently in the act of being human, of reaching for the thing you admire and landing somewhere honest. You sat with Bankei and heard one quiet miracle. Hungry, he ate. Thirsty, he drank. And felt, maybe, that this too is available to you, not as an achievement, as a permission. You sat with Sengai's 4 characters on a piece of paper and felt them turn the way the farmer's fortune turns, from sentence to blessing. You walked with Ryokan from an empty hut to a full sky, and something in you recognized that there are kinds of wealth no one can take, not even a thief, not even a difficult year. You heard one note of a flute and then the mountain. You held a vine over an abyss and tasted something sweet, and it was sweet, and the moment was enough. You heard a gong ring in a dying man's room and watched something open in him for the first and last time, and felt the opening as if it were yours. And you sat with a farmer who had learned to meet the turning world with a word that is not quite a word, maybe, and felt how light that is to carry. How much lighter than certainty. How much more room it leaves for the morning to be different from what you feared tonight. 49 stories. The old teachings speak of 49 days, the days of the bardo, the passage between one thing and the next. You need not carry that number as doctrine. But you may feel it as a rhythm, 49 small doorways, and on the other side of each one, a slightly different quality of quiet, a slightly deeper water. And you did not need to walk through all of them to arrive at where you are right now, which is very far in, and very still, and very close to wherever it is that sleep comes from. The river that has been moving through this whole night is slowing now. Not stopping, rivers do not stop, but slowing, spreading out, becoming the wide, flat water near the mouth where you cannot feel the current anymore, only the movement, only the bearing forward. You are being borne forward. The breath comes and goes without your help. The body rests in what is holding it. The mind, which has been so generous tonight, so willing to follow one story and then another, is allowed now to let go of the thread, to drift, to become what it always is underneath the stories and the trying, something quiet and spacious and already at rest. If you wake in the morning remembering nothing of what was told tonight, that is not a loss. The water moved through. Something was touched that has no name and needs no name. The bowl was washed. The pail's bottom fell out. The gate stood open. Maybe subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.